I'm Gloria with the Financial Times. I'd like to ask, how do you think the U.S. election results will affect Beijing's domestic economic policy? Like, for example, if Trump is elected and he dramatically increases tariffs on products from China, will Beijing kind of like make more efforts to make its economy less reliant on exports, but do more things to boost demand at home? And is this also something that concerns multinationals in China? I know some of them, like nowadays, are going for the in China for China strategy.
Yeah, I should probably ask you this question. You're going to give a better, more informed answer than me. I'll give you. My impression is that when journalists are saying that the next National People's Congress, the exact numbers that they put out for the current ongoing stimulus measures might be adjusted at the last minute based on the U.S. election outcome. That's possible. But I think more important is the Chinese approach to macroeconomic modulation and stimulus is something that is iterative and doesn't require, it's not just like we're going to announce a policy and then we're not going to do anything else until another year from now. If they feel like they need to do more to compensate for negative impacts of the external accounts, then they probably will, right? And figure out some fiscal or monetary policy measures to compensate for that. I'm quite encouraged that there's seemingly a new flexibility in thinking about macroeconomic policy in Beijing, given their circumstances and the fact that they're not likely to reach the 5% target, has seemingly introduced some more creative thinking about taking measures to both work through the property problem and also help out the local governments so that they actually can pay people, and that drag on consumer and investor sentiment is also ameliorated. So I think a lot of investors are watching that and hopefully looking for some green shoots of Chinese policy. But I guess at the end of the day, I'm not sure how important the international piece is to that overall calculation. I think it's in there, but it's not the main shaping factor in what's driving Chinese macroeconomic policy. I think it's their own domestic performance and sentiment that are the more important factors in the decision making. Does that help at all? Make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
Well, maybe I ask a follow-up that. How would China's foreign policy change or be affected depending on who wins the election?
Probably not that much, but they're in a strategic sense. I think China's got a plan, an overall foreign policy that is driven by a lot of factors that we don't need to go through them all right now. And so it's more of a tactical adjustment. So if Mr. Trump is elected, I think my guess is that they'll take steps simultaneously to kind of send a little bit of warning shocks directly to Mr. Trump, but also some towards U.S. partners and allies, trying to make it Mr. Trump's fault that China is applying negative energy on places like Japan, Australia, and Europe, and see if they can exacerbate the likely rifts that might open up between the U.S. And its allies and partners, given what I was saying about a transactional approach from Donald Trump to those relationships. So it's sort of some tactical maneuvers to try to put a wedge, if you will, between the U.S. and its friends. Would be a more prominent part of policy under Trump because more likely to be successful. But at the same time, do a direct outreach to him And it's a well-trodden road of flattery and false obsequiousness that seems to work in getting attention from Mr. Trump and then trying to soften his approach in an overall, in a direct dialogue sense. And then with Harris, I wouldn't expect much change from what they're doing right now. They'll ask for reassurances from her that she's interested in the management part of managed competition, and then forge forward from there and try and continue all of the dialogues and other things that have been taking place in the last year and a half. It's just the best guess.
Okay. Two things. One on trade again. President Trump was very focused on the balance of trade. He doesn't like trade deficits. He likes the surplus. With China plus one and shifting supply chains, of course, what's happened is surpluses have really grown quite a lot, coming from places like Vietnam or Indonesia, in part to solve, the problem of direct exports to the U.S. And so I just wonder how you think it's solving one problem, but it's creating a new one, which is much bigger surpluses, from a Trump perspective. So I just wonder how you see that. And then the other one is immigration. I think when we focus on a Trump administration, there's a lot of talk about deportations of illegal aliens in the U.S., which of course there are people from all countries making that, or many countries in that category. But I think another one too is just shutting down, things like work visas and that kind of thing. I just wonder whether, from how you think about that from the Asian perspective.
Yeah, so the trade diversion effects of tariffs will happen. In that terms, I guess I'm a believer in the idea that the economic textbook idea that the overall trade balance is going to be driven by the exchange rate and interest rates, but then more fundamentally by the savings and investment balance in each economy. So trying to bring U.S. external trade accounts into balance using tax policies is going to be unsuccessful at the end of the day. And it will, so a smaller trade deficit from the U.S. perspective with China will result in a larger trade deficit with other economies. And it's just kind of a shell game that is mostly political in nature, really, or it's directed at China as a nemesis of the United States as opposed to fundamentally an economic policy that solves any problems. So I would much prefer to see, I'm not campaigning for president, but if I were, I would be talking about education, investment in the U.S. economy, improving efficiency, investing in new technologies, all the things that actually create growth over the long term. Supply side measures as opposed to trying to manipulate demand through taxation. But I'm not running for president. And never will. Thank God. On immigration, so the Biden administration dialed back a little bit on China-focused scientific espionage / scientific information diversion focused restrictions on immigration a little bit, but not a lot. And so those measures are kind of still in place, and it's acting as a drag on STEM industry people, in particular, studying or working in the United States. And there's diminished opportunity for Chinese scientists and technologists to participate in the U.S. economy as a result, but not entirely eliminated. I think that the main energy of immigration enforcement for a Trump administration would be the overall numbers and doing something about, exactly as he said he will do, doing something about the large number of undocumented immigrants in the United States that are being, I don't agree with his accounting of it, but that are causing big problems in U.S. society and the U.S. economy. And that's the big immigration issue. And then the China-focused stuff is kind of a sideshow relative to that. But there's enough negative energy around immigration in general that some of that will probably spill over into China-specific policies as well, I would expect. So I don't think things will get better necessarily with either administration, but they could get worse under a Trump administration. From the perspective of people who are trying to do technology businesses across borders between the U.S. and China, it could get even more complicated.
So would the China initiative come back with Trump?
It's possible. It's possible. It kind of got, it was so unsuccessful that it kind of earned a bad name for itself with that name associated with it. But there could be additional FBI resources put into trying to get a handle on and apprehend and stop technology diversion by individuals, which is essentially, that was the stated purpose of the China initiative, but it ended up harassing a bunch of college professors and not really accomplishing anything, in my opinion. But it could come back. I'm not sure.
Well, it did accomplish that some of those have moved back to Asia or China. So.
Right, and there's both a pull and a push factor there. So the U.S. was pushing people out, at the same time China was giving them raises. So it's a market, right? Yeah. So individuals will react to those circumstances.
Okay, question over here.
Hi, Bay Consulting. I just had a question on trade policy, looking a bit more towards the long term, especially under a potential Trump 2.0 administration. And I was just wondering about the kind of potential reputational risks for the U.S. The potential for loss of huge political influence and sway across Asia Pacific as it continues to not really engage in any kind of substantial trade agenda with regards to free trade agreements. I mean, noted that we saw the creation of IPEF under Biden, and that we did see 13 other economies sign up right away for that without hesitation. But even still, IPEF is, there's a lot of issues with it, and we're seeing countries across the region within Asia Pacific really, they want trade and economic engagement more than anything. At least my understanding is, where the U.S. is really engaged on a military security standpoint, not very engaged in trade and economics. So anyway, so looking long-term under potential Trump administration, what are the, kind of potential risks of losing political influence and sway by continuing not to engage in trade and really having no time horizon for re-engaging in any kind of substantial trade agreements with other countries in Asia?
Yes, I think the U.S. Well, first of all, I'll make a plug for a friend of mine named Michael Beeman wrote a book recently called "Walking Out," where it's a book that's written in a way that both policy people and academics would enjoy it. So if you want to read an accounting of the U.S. Stepping back from its previous approach on trade, I recommend that book. Free advertisement over Michael. Because what's happened is both parties moving away from the previous consensus that globalization is a good thing, rising tide floats all boats, and if the U.S. is investing in creation of jobs overseas, that ultimately results in more exports from the United States, higher value-added jobs in the U.S., more design jobs, fewer jobs, turning a screwdriver kind of philosophy has gone away because of the political factors that I described earlier. And I don't see it coming back in the next 4 years for either party. That said, I do think that the push in the direction against from that that consensus which still exists amongst most middle powers. What you see these days is the middle powers, not China, not US countries, are the ones that are most active in positive trade agendas, right? Because they perceive that as in their self-interest, and they can still order things. They have enough agency that they can move policy and deepen their relationships. That's happening within ASEAN. It's happening on the ASEAN-centric trade configurations, etc. But when China or the U.S. are in the game, it slows it down a lot, right? So with that in mind, things will be just a little bit worse under Trump than under Harris. And the rhetoric will be considerably worse, and the reality will be a little bit worse.
There was a question over here. Yes, Seth?
Seth Peterson, Korn Ferry. Stephen Roach had a piece, an opinion piece last week about xenophobia. And I'm just looking for some positive signs of hope here, but thinking about whether with Waltz or Musk, you'd have a pragmatic, business-minded thinking about, Chinese investment in the U.S., for example. That the things have gone to such an extreme that a battery plant in Michigan gets canceled because of the xenophobia. And interested in your perspective on shifting that.
So and this is going to sound very much like I still am a State Department person, but the way relying on specific individuals like Waltz or Musk to somehow turn things around is not going to really work. The way things get turned around is a combination of additional contacts to humanize relationships. So fear comes from either misunderstanding or lack of contact, or it's grounded in actual adverse actions by that of whom you are afraid. I think all of those are true. So China's foreign policy, the whole wolf warrior thing, the aggressive approach towards South China Sea, the harassment of Taiwan, the aggressive external-facing economic policies, some of the ways that Belt and Road was carried out, all of those things are negative factors that create fear of China, right? And then lack of contact and lack of discussion exacerbates that problem. So how do you solve that situation? Well, China could lighten up and become a more friendly and constructive member of the international community, or people could have more contact with China and have a deeper understanding of what the actual problems are and as they impact them rather than the perceived ones. Because I think I both agree with the idea that the perception of contradictory interests exceeds reality, but there is reality there. And so you can either change the reality by China not working so much at cross purposes to the rest of the global community, or you can have better information about what it's actually doing compared to what it's perceived as doing. Because I think both phenomena exist. China is doing stuff that is damaging to U.S. interests and the interests of a lot of countries, and then people observing that are adding an additional sort of China is more capable than it really is. China's 10-foot-tall thing on top of that, and that can be diminished through greater contact, and people can see that there's counter trends and there's some subtlety to the whole situation. Does that make sense?
Brett?
Yeah. Kirk, good to see you again. I saw you there twice in September with Anshan Korea and Anshan Shanghai. You got 3 Anshans in one meeting. So I just wanted to ask you about that reality aspect. One of the things that I noticed when I was in Washington, and maybe Jeff maybe also see it too, is that Washington bubble consensus view around trade, but also China. And one of the observations in my time when I was in DC, I just noticed that there was this, obviously the intensity of the dislike of China as a geopolitical opponent, but I also do see the trade agenda. The trade agenda under USTR has not been ideal. But I wonder at some point is that I see those two kind of issues kind of colliding with each other. Is that as U.S. companies we do have a very good role to play in APAC, but at the same time back in Washington there's not a really good story around trade to be told. But yet at the same time they say, well, we got to compete with China. So do you see like that kind of reality hitting up against this? We finally need to do something on trade in order to compete with China.
I'm not sure I quite get the question, but if the question is that the U.S. needs to have a more positive, proactive, positive sum type trade agenda in order to counter China's agenda, then the answer is no. That those dots are not being connected in the mind of the body politic. There's more, everything that relative to U.S.-China relations tends to generate negative action, negative energy, negative leverage policies by the United States rather than positive leverage policies. So the connection between China is doing things in the region that are against U.S. interests, therefore we should counter that by offering a positive approach to other countries of the region, is, as stated in the previous question, mostly focused on the security side rather than on the economic side. By government, by business, it's happening every day. Business is investing more and more in Southeast Asia and India and Northeast Asia. U.S. business communities is very, very, very much engaged. And I think this is just kind of a political question rather than an economic rationality one. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, I think there was another question here. Yeah.
We've only been working on this Asia Pacific Chambers of Commerce for 40 years or maybe longer, and there's almost never been support, not only in Washington, but also among major companies because they have other tax issues that they think are more important. But I was just with someone who works with the Trump campaign, I don't know, very senior in Hong Kong, and he's convinced that it'll move in that direction if Trump is reelected. I had no idea if this would happen, but nonetheless, it's just something that hasn't come up before, and it'd be very interesting.
Well, if you want to be hopeful about it, I'll give you one piece of analysis which might make you more hopeful, which is that I don't think people in the U.S. really care.
No, they don't.
So it's the kind of thing that could be slipped into the tax code somehow, but it's still got to get past 535 eyeballs in Congress in order to get slipped into the tax code, and so that's the trick, right? And the president can propose something that is to the members of Congress support it, and that's the real pinch point, I think, on the policy.
You could count supporters on the fingers of one hand, literally, for a long time. I don't know if that'll change. Thank you.